Hi, I'm Nicholeen Peck, and I teach all over the world about parenting, good communication, how to build strong family bonds, education, and child development. In this video, we are going to be discussing how to talk to your child about sex. Talking about sex, it's probably one of the things that most parents really do not look forward to. In fact, they probably push it off for as long as possible. I know there's some that maybe just love the topic of sex so much that they just jump right in and they actually address it really wrong. In fact, there is a wrong way to talk about sex with your child. We are going to talk about them. There's kind of a wrong way and a wrong time too. So we need to be careful to make sure that we get it just right. But there is also a right way, a good way, and a lot of it involves your own parental intuition, so you can still make it your own. But I want to give you some parameters that could maybe make it so that your talk about the birds and the bees goes well for you and your child. Just so you know, parents don't like having the sex talk, but just so you know, most children don't like having the sex talk either. Okay? That's just how it goes. Everybody knows it has to be discussed, but the children feel uncomfortable, embarrassed by it sometimes. They just feel like, why are we having this conversation? Why do I have to talk about my genitalia? You know, children usually have a sense of modesty about themselves that they like to maintain for quite a period of time. In fact, what starts as modesty around age like 4 and 5 and 6, sometimes even sooner for some children, really they don't lose until, they're at a stage where they're now engaging in sexual activity. And hopefully that's a little bit later down the road. I don't feel like I fully lost, and I shouldn't even say lost because I still consider myself a very modest person, but I didn't get to a point where I felt comfortable just talking about all the sexual things until I had my first child. And at that point, the OBs had seen and done everything to me that I was like, well, okay, here we go. And so really, a lot of people feel that this is an uncomfortable topic, but because it's an uncomfortable topic, that's all the more reason that we know it does need to be discussed. There is a right person to discuss this topic. Do not save the conversation about sex and about the birds and the bees and all of that to the teacher at school. The teacher at school is not the person who understands what your child has fully experienced, what your child's sensitivities are, where they're at, maybe if they've even experienced some sort of abuse or something. Because even if a person has had an abuse situation, you still need to talk about sex. For many years, I did therapeutic treatment care for troubled children, and many of them had been sexually abused. And it fell upon me to actually have conversations with them about sex because now I was the parent and I needed to make sure that they understood the parameters of sex and what healthy sex actually entailed and what they needed to think about sex in order to not be an abuser in the future or not be taken advantage of again. So a person who's abused still needs to have those conversations, but those are going to be very different conversations than with a child who has never had conversations about sex yet. Now, when I took in these troubled teens who had sexual pasts, some of them had been perpetrators and had done sexual things to other people. I had to keep my children safe, and my children were very little. Very little. When I started doing foster care, my children, I had 2 at the time, and they were ages 3 and 1. Can you prepare a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old not to be taken advantage of, not to be abused sexually? Well, I decided I needed to try because I was bringing these other children in my home. I needed to teach my young children boundaries, sexual boundaries. So that's where I began. At ages 1 and 3, I taught my children that they had special bodies, private body parts that nobody got to see or touch, and that the only people that could help them were mom or dad if they were helping keep the body parts clean, or maybe the doctor if there was a sickness or a problem with the body parts, but mom or dad would always be there with them. And usually it was like mom. Mom's always going to be there. So we're going to talk about the wrong way to talk about sex, as well as the right way, and the times to do that, and the places to do that too. But before we do, have you subscribed to this channel yet? Because this channel has a lot to do with child development and parenting that could really be beneficial for you as you're helping your child grow through all the phases of development. All right, so let's talk about what not to do. There are so many parents that feel like, okay, I've just got to have this talk. We're going to do the one and done. I do not believe that talking about sex should be a one and done. It should be something that happens over a gradual period of time. Just like I was mentioning, first we talk about boundaries, our private parts, our special bodies that people do not get to see. I use that type of term. I don't need to tell my child a term like vagina and penis and those types of things and vulva and all these different things. We don't need to tell those things to our children, okay? Because they don't need those pieces when they're just little teeny ones. They just need the boundaries. They need to know who gets to talk about their body with them, who gets to see their body, if they ever do, and how that happens. And that's it. And then there comes a point where we're going to talk a little bit more about what we might call things, okay, if we need to. And we're going to be talking about where babies come from and those types of things. So that's going to happen. As they get a little bit older, maybe they hit the age of 6 or 8 and they're interested about this. So when I was pregnant with my last baby, I had a child who was 6, a child who was 8, and a child who was 2. And I actually was preparing all 3 of those children to be able to attend the birth or the moment of birth. Not that they would have been down south on the birth, but up by mom, but they would see the baby did come out of mom. And so that they would recognize, oh, babies grow inside of mom. So we had conversations about, how a baby grows inside mom's tummy to the 2-year-old, okay? The 6-year-old and the 8-year-old, I talked to them about sperm and about egg and about mothers and fathers and how their sperm and their egg join together, and that's how they create a baby. They don't need to know yet necessarily how the sperm gets there, especially like the little child, the 2-year-old, definitely not. The 6-year-old, maybe not, depending on where you live. If you live in a super sexual culture, there are some places in Europe and stuff where on the billboards it's like sex acts. Okay, well, or if you live in a sexualized culture, maybe Las Vegas or something, you might have to talk about things a little bit earlier than if you live out in the country. But if you live out in the country, you might be seeing animals that are having sex and having babies, and you might use that as an opportunity to talk about sex to your children. And that the purpose of the sex, especially when the children are very young, the purpose of the sex is babies. That's the purpose. And so when you talk to the 8-year-old and the 6-year-old about sex and about sperm and egg and mommies and daddies, it's to create babies. And if they ask you, well, how does the sperm get there? Because they might ask those questions. Well, when they ask a question, answer the question truthfully and honestly. And you say, well, daddies have a body part that looks like this. It's called a penis. And mommies have a body part that looks kind of more like a hole, and they just go inside each other. And that's how it gets there. And so then the baby can grow inside the mommy. And that's all they need to know unless they have more questions. You don't have to talk about STDs and HIV and, oral things and anal things and all the different things. You don't have to talk about any of those things. You don't have to talk about makeout sessions and kissing and, none of those things yet. So you see, okay, this is where they're at. Well, so then as they get a little bit older and the conversation, maybe in the locker room or at school, gets to be a little bit more risque, or it's going to become a little bit more risque, beat the locker room to the punch. If you know they're going to be in a locker room, okay, now we're hitting age 12 maybe. Okay, we just got to lay it all out. But you don't have to do it in a way that is graphic, sensual, titillating. It never should be like that. You don't need to dress up vegetables with contraceptives. You don't have to do any of those things that are happening in some schools and places around the world. Those types of comprehensive sexuality education practices have actually been proven now by data to actually encourage more sexual activity in children. So, do you want your child to engage in sexual activity? Well, I mean, if so, then I guess you would make it very titillating, but then that's actually called something. It's called grooming, which is what abusers do to children. So you want to make sure that you keep things very just, the nuts and bolts of stuff, the information. And you might say when your child gets to the age of 12, hey, some people are going to use some terms. And these terms are a little gross, and I'm just going to tell you what they are. So if you ever hear a person use this term, and just think of some of the graphic terms that are used in a locker room, okay? I'm not going to say them here on YouTube, but if they use this term, this is what it means. If somebody says this word, this swear word, this is what it means. I mean, don't find yourself saying that for anything, right? It's disrespectful to actually the holy act of sex, right? And so you would explain to the person the things that they're going to find in that teen culture as they're starting to launch into that world. You be the first voice, because if the friends get to them first or the teacher at school gets to them first, then those people become the expert and you are secondary. If you want to make sure your child has a healthy understanding of sex, because you have a healthy understanding of sex, then you need to be the first one to talk about all of those things. Talk about what it really means to be abstinent, because sometimes even the sex education programs present abstinence as anal sex and oral sex and all these other petting and masturbation and all this kind of stuff, and that is not. Those things are not abstinence. Abstinence means you do not engage in sexuality. And sexuality is generally assumed to mean at this point, the definition has changed a little bit. It doesn't just mean having sex in the actual act, but it means nowadays what people think, and I don't like this definition if I'm going to be quite honest, but this is what people are saying, that it means how you like your sex. So this would mean all of the intricacies of how you get stimulated, your appetite for stimulation. So when you are discussing with your child, make sure that you do not feed that appetite. So we're going to talk more about definitions here for a second, but I just want you to know that it used to be that sexuality meant that man and woman engaging in intercourse. That's what sexuality meant. That's how I like to think of sexuality. But sadly, nowadays, people use sexuality as, how you prefer your sex. And so it leads to all of the titillating things related to sexuality. And this is why sexuality education in the schools is actually problematic and can definitely go wrong when we get into basically stimulating the children or bringing curiosity to the children instead of informing the children, which is so different. And we see this change in definition happening all the time around us when it comes to people pushing, different things on society. They take a term that we normally feel like we trust, we understand, like sexuality, and then they adjust it. Or like abstinence, and then they adjust it. And so what we have to recognize is that we need to teach our children what those words mean and what they might mean too. That's important, so that they understand, well, if somebody is telling me abstinence and they want to do this sexual thing with me, but that's actually abstinence, we can say, actually, no, that's not abstinence, because I know what abstinence is. If we do not define the words for the children, and we allow society to define those words and terms, then our children might be left prey to a sexual predator. And sometimes those predators are other children. Sometimes they are, other adults and people around them in other areas of trust in their lives, which is really sad. I do want you to know that the majority of children who were sexually abused that came to live with me as foster children were sexually abused by other children, by peers. Some of them by other family members, like uncles or brothers or things like that, but most of them, it was from peers sexually acting out on each other and probably rationalizing it in some way. Maybe even got the idea, who knows, from either, the media or maybe even their sex ed class. When you're teaching your children about sex, it's super helpful to teach them skills that they might need for success. So this channel, I teach lots of skills, like the 4 basic skills of self-government, like following instructions, accepting no answers and criticism, accepting consequences, and disagreeing appropriately. Learning those skills are also very helpful in being able to manage the sex culture that's going on around our children. What if you just taught them that certain images that they see are a no answer, and that they need to just say, nope, that's a no, I'm not going to look at it. They give themselves a no answer. They drop the subject about it in their head. What if certain conversations that peers start to have that lead towards sex talk, that they just learn, that's a no answer, I'm not going to have that conversation. That's disrespectful to how people are made. That makes it selfish and not about what it really means, which when a person creates another person, that's an act of sacrifice. It may be pleasurable at the time, but it's actually an act of sacrifice to accept that they're going to raise that other person. It's not a pleasurable, shouldn't be selfish act like, oh, this is just something I do for me. That's not what it's about. And you can teach your children to have that kind of respect for sex. So teach your children how to give themselves no answer, how to tell their friends no on certain conversations, and for sure on certain acts. Empower them. Teach them more. The skills of self-government can absolutely help. I really recommend probably going to the video on this channel next called The Not So Known Secret for Parenting Success. That class, which is a full-length class, is going to give you some of the nuts and bolts of self-government that will help you with these skills so that your children can have the skills ready for that sex talk so that they can be successful. Go to that video now. I'll see you there.